My name is Evelyn Hart. And the day my father told the world I wasn't worth a single cent was the day I stopped trying to earn his love and started claiming my power. It was supposed to be a formal gathering, a ceremonial meeting to discuss the transition of Hart Group's legacy. The dining room of our family's lakefront estate in Vermont was filled with polished mahogany, leather chairs, and tension so thick it could have cracked the glass windows behind us. Outside, the lake lay still, covered in a blanket of snow. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but serene. My younger half-brother, Chase, was lounging with his usual smugness, swirling a glass of aged bourbon like he already owned the world. My stepmother, Lillian, pristine as ever in her pearl button coat, sat beside him with a faint smile of satisfaction. And at the head of the table was the man who had built an empire with his bare hands and seemed more proud of that fact than of anything his children had ever done. My father, Douglas Hart. I sat at the far end, quiet, composed, though my heartbeat pounded like a war drum beneath my ribs. "Let's be clear about something before we begin," my father said, his voice cold and commanding. "This isn't charity, it's business. And in business, you reward results, not sentiment." He didn't even look at me. Just turned to Chase and nodded. Mr. Barnett, the family attorney, reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 thick envelopes. One, he handed to Chase with a formal nod. "To Chase Hart," Mr. Barnett began, "you are hereby granted the entirety of the Hart Group's executive holdings, including but not limited to the company's leadership, all real estate properties under the Hart estate, and access to the offshore investment accounts as detailed." I didn't hear the rest. My ears buzzed. My fingers clenched under the table. I had spent 12 years in that company, built the public relations division from the ground up. I'd sacrificed relationships, turned down dream jobs, stayed loyal even after my father ignored my ideas, dismissed my voice, and celebrated Chase's every mediocre success. But today, I wasn't angry. I was prepared. "And as for Evelyn," my father said, finally turning to face me. There was a pause, sharp and calculated, meant to humiliate. "You've always had a heart for art, for causes, for emotion. Admirable, but irrelevant. You walked away from the board. You chose dreams over dollars. So no, Evelyn, you're not getting a penny." He said it with a smile, like it amused him. Lillian chuckled softly. Chase didn't even meet my eyes. I looked around that table and realized this wasn't just about money. It was about erasure, about control, about punishment. "You don't mean that," I said quietly, not pleading, just confirming. "I absolutely do," he said. "I told you years ago there's no place for weakness in this family." Mr. Barnett cleared his throat. "Douglas, if I may, there is one more item we need to review." "Not now," my father snapped. But Mr. Barnett didn't stop. He reached slowly into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller, sealed envelope. "This was entrusted to me 6 years ago," he said, "by your late mother, Margaret Hart." The room fell silent. My grandmother. She had built Hart Group's philanthropic foundation. She had been my greatest ally, my source of quiet strength, the only one who used to say, "They mistake your kindness for softness, but that heart of yours is forged from steel." My father paled. "That's not legally binding." "It is?" Barnett interrupted, more firm than I'd ever heard him. "She retained 52% of the Class A voting shares until her death, and her final amendment to the family trust was triggered today, should Evelyn be formally disinherited." I sat frozen as Mr. Barnett broke the seal and read aloud. "To my granddaughter, Evelyn Grace Hart, I leave full control of my shares in Hart Group Holdings. Effective immediately, she becomes majority stakeholder and holds sole voting authority until the next fiscal review." The storm outside had been loud before, but now the room was thunder. "What?" my father shouted, standing up so fast his chair toppled. "That's not possible. You forged this—" "I was there," Mr. Barnett said calmly. "Your mother's signature. A notary present. This is real." Lillian gasped. Chase finally looked at me, his expression stunned, almost afraid. I rose slowly, my hands steady, my heart on fire. "You told me I wasn't worth a penny," I said to my father. "But I'm worth more than you ever understood. And thanks to the one person who truly believed in me. I have the power now, not to destroy you, to rebuild what you corrupted." The silence that followed was thick, echoing, absolute. He couldn't speak. Not because he was silenced, but because he knew it was over. And if you felt that shift, if something inside you stirred while reading this moment, stay with me. Because what happened next proved just how dangerous power can be when it's finally in the hands of someone who knows what to do with it. Subscribe now if you believe that integrity always finds its voice, because the next chapter of this story will leave you breathless. The silence that followed the lawyer's announcement clung to the walls like fog. Heavy, unmoving, almost sacred. For a moment, no one breathed. My father stood there, paralyzed, by the sheer audacity of the truth, by the name he'd spent years trying to erase now echoing back at him, weighted by power. I didn't sit back down. I couldn't. My legs trembled beneath me, but the fire in my chest held me upright. "You think this means anything?" My father spat, finally breaking the silence. His voice cracked with something between fury and fear. "You think you've won because she handed you some piece of paper? You've never run a company. You've never made a real decision in your life." I met his eyes for the first time in years without flinching. "Maybe not the kind of decisions you admire," I said quietly. "But I've made decisions that saved lives. Decisions that put people first, not profit." He scoffed, pacing like a caged animal. "This company was built on strategy, Evelyn, on dominance, not idealism. And that's why it's bleeding from the inside," I replied. "You don't know what your kingdom looks like from the basement floors. But I do." Chase finally stirred, his voice quieter than usual. "Dad, maybe we should talk this." "Through talk?" my father snapped, turning on him. "We don't negotiate with betrayal." "Then maybe that's why you've been left behind," I said. It was a small sentence, almost soft. But it landed like a grenade. My father turned slowly, his eyes dark. "Do you think you're better than me now, because you have a title?" "No," I said, stepping toward him, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm finally free of trying to be." That's when he laughed. Not a hearty laugh, a brittle, bitter one that splintered the air. "This is all a setup," he growled. "Your grandmother was always sentimental. She babied you. She never understood the real world. She thought running a foundation made you ready to run an empire? You don't have the stomach for this, Evelyn. You never did. It should have hurt. It didn't." Mr. Barnett stood from his chair. "That's enough, Douglas." But my father wasn't finished. "I built this name from nothing," he thundered. "Your grandmother gave you shares, but she didn't give you the blood I poured into this floor." "You poured blood, all right," I said, "but not all of it was yours." He froze. "Do you think I didn't know?" I continued. "The settlements paid off quietly. The employees forced out after speaking up. The side deals you buried under shell corporations. I was never blind. I was just silent. But not anymore." Lillian stood now too, suddenly pale. "Evelyn, this isn't the time." "It's long past time," I said. I turned to Mr. Barnett. "I want an audit, effective immediately. A full review of Hart Group's financials, departmental structures, internal policies, all of it." My father's jaw dropped. "You wouldn't." "I already have," I said. And just like that, the room flipped. I could feel it, like the tide pulling back before a wave crashes. "I'm not here to tear everything down," I said, addressing them all. "But I will dig out the rot. This company was never meant to be a crown passed between kings. It was built to create something lasting, and I'll be damned if I let it die in silence." Chase stood, his face red with 1,000 emotions he didn't know how to show. "You don't understand what you're starting, Evelyn." "I do," I said. "I understand exactly what I'm starting. Something new." He shook his head. "You've made enemies today." "No," I corrected. "I revealed them." Mr. Barnett stepped forward. "Miss Hart, the board will need to be informed. There are protocols." "Then let's begin," I said. "Because I didn't come here to claim a throne. I came to clean house." The door opened, and a staff member peeked in to inform us that the car was ready. My father looked at me with a hatred I'd never seen before. Raw, unraveling, almost afraid. "You'll destroy everything," he whispered. "No," I replied softly. "I'm going to rebuild it. But first, I need to remove the parts that were always designed to collapse." He didn't follow me out. Neither did Chase. Only Mr. Barnett walked beside me, silent, steady, like someone who'd waited years to see the truth rise from the ashes. As we stepped outside, the wind had stopped. The lake shimmered under the fading sun. I took a deep breath, the air biting and clean. I wasn't scared anymore. The girl who once begged for a seat at the table was gone. I'd built my own. And now? Everyone else would have to learn where they stood. If this moment hit you like it hit them, if you've ever been told you were too soft to lead, too kind to be strong, stick with me. Because the storm hasn't passed. It's only just begun. And what happens next will shake the legacy of Hart Group to its core. The air inside Hart Group's headquarters didn't just hum, it trembled. Whispers followed me through every hallway, every corner office, every glass-paneled conference room like a ghost nobody expected to return. My name, once spoken with dismissive politeness or forgotten altogether, now carried a strange new weight. But it wasn't respect. Not yet. It was fear, confusion, anticipation. People didn't know what I would do next, and neither did I. I stepped into the elevator that morning with a coffee in hand and a silent war raging behind my eyes. Just 2 days ago, I'd walked into a boardroom expecting to be discarded. Instead, I left holding the reins of an empire. But what I inherited wasn't power. It was decay dressed in designer suits and boardroom titles. On the 27th floor, the heart of operations, the air was tense. Conversations halted as I passed. Not because I was intimidating, because I was unpredictable. And in a place built on predictability, that was dangerous. I entered my new office, a glass fortress overlooking the city my family helped shape. The skyline stared back at me like a challenge. This wasn't just a corner office. It was a throne surrounded by landmines. Waiting. On my desk was a manila folder, unmarked. No note, no signature, but I knew exactly who had left it. Inside were internal memos, performance reports, and expense logs. 3 years' worth of paper trails tied to Chase's division. Lavish dinners labeled as client outreach, personal vacations disguised as strategy retreats, hush payments to departing employees marked as early incentives. The rot I feared ran deeper than I'd thought. And this wasn't anonymous. It was a message, a warning. If I moved against Chase, he'd retaliate. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers trembling not from fear but rage. He wasn't going to protect the legacy. He was going to scorch the earth just to prove I wasn't worthy of standing on it. A knock came. It was Barnett. "You saw it?" he asked, his tone heavy. I nodded. He walked in, closed the door behind him, and dropped his voice. "We traced the documents. They were left on your desk by someone from finance. No cameras caught them, but timing lines up with Chase's lunch. Meeting yesterday. Why now? I asked. Barnett hesitated. Because he thinks you're bluffing. He thinks you'll play nice. He's wrong, I said flatly. But truthfully, I wasn't sure. I wasn't built for blood sport. That had always been my father's world, Chase's world. I dealt in empathy, not leverage. And suddenly, I had to ask myself, could I be the kind of leader who dismantles her own family? I left the office and headed straight to HR. 2 hours. Later, I was sitting across from Rosa, the janitor who had once offered me tea when the world collapsed on my shoulders. She looked surprised to see me. I need your help, I said. She blinked. With what? Truth, I said. All of it. And so she told me. About the employee who was fired after exposing procurement fraud. About the assistant who filed a harassment claim that disappeared. About Chase screaming at staff behind closed doors and silencing complaints with threats. It wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was people, wounds, stories buried beneath corporate polish. My hands shook under the weight of it all. Later that evening, I called a meeting. Not the board, the staff. From every floor, every department. No suits, no press, just us. They shuffled in slowly, wary, curious. I stood at the front, no podium, no projector, just me and them. I won't waste your time, I began. You've seen what this place has become. A system built to benefit a few while breaking the backs of the many. The room was silent. I didn't come here to sit in a chair and make pretty speeches. I came to listen, to lead, and to hold people accountable, even if they share my last name. A murmur moved through the room like a breeze. I pulled out the folder. This was left on my desk, a threat, a warning. But what it really is, I paused, holding it up, is evidence. I told them what I'd found. No names, just facts. And then I made them a promise. This isn't a purge, it's a reckoning. Those who did wrong will be held accountable. Those who were wronged will be heard. And those still here, I looked, them in the eyes, one by one, will be part of building something better. Someone clapped, then another, until it rippled into a full wave. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the weight of what came next. Because I knew Chase wouldn't go quietly. And I was right. That night, my phone lit up with a text. You just declared war on your own blood. Be ready. No name. But I knew who sent it, what Chase didn't. Understand was that this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about blood. It was about legacy. And I'd rather set fire to Heart Group and rebuild it from ash than let it stay a palace built on silence. If you've ever had to choose between peace and truth, if you've ever risked everything to do what's right, stay with me. Because the storm is far from over, and what's coming next will change everything. By the time the sun broke through the Manhattan skyline the next morning, I was already at my desk. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. Not with Chase's message echoing in my mind like a threat, and a promise wrapped in one chilling line. You just declared war on your own blood. War wasn't what I wanted. But I was no longer afraid of it. I stared out the window of my office, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the pulse of the city far below. Horns, footsteps, life. Out there, people woke up to live. In here, we woke up to survive. If you worked under my brother, that is. Rosa came in just after 7 a.m. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a folded paper towel with a warm cinnamon roll inside. You need to eat something, she said softly, her voice like a balm. If you're going to take him down, you'll need more than coffee. I managed a tired smile. Thank you. Then I opened my inbox. The chaos had already begun. Anonymous internal emails leaking confidential information about my past. Alleged conflicts of interest. Misleading headlines from 2 trade blogs, likely fed by Chase's friends in PR, casting doubt on my ability to lead after just 3 days in the seat. One even called me an inexperienced heiress with a bleeding heart agenda. I should have been furious. I should have thrown something, shouted, cursed. But I didn't. Instead, I printed every article, every email, and every baseless accusation, and stacked them on the corner of my desk. Let them try. Mid-morning, the boardroom filled once again. This time, it wasn't a private family showdown. It was a scheduled quarterly review. Cameras on, reporters in the lobby, shareholders watching. Remotely, I took my seat at the head of the table, and for the first time, it felt right. Chase sat opposite me, his suit perfect, his expression smug. "Madam Chair," he greeted, like venom wrapped in velvet. I nodded, expression unreadable. "Mr. Hart, we opened with the performance review. Numbers, forecasts, growth charts, all fine on paper, all hiding rot beneath the ink." I waited for him to make his move. And then he did. "I think," Chase said, turning smoothly toward the board. "In light of recent uncertainty surrounding executive leadership, it would be prudent to consider a motion to appoint an external advisor to oversee Ava's transitional period." The room tensed, polite gasps barely masked by cleared throats and shuffling papers. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. "That sounds reasonable," one board member murmured. "We've never had a sudden transfer of power quite like this." "Transparency is key," Chase added, his voice like silk laced with acid. "Ava, of course, would still retain her role, but this way, our investors have reassurance." He was trying to gut me politely, paint me as unstable without ever saying the word, box me into a powerless figurehead while he continued running. Things from the shadows. But I was done playing nice. I leaned forward, folding my hands calmly. "You're right," I said. "Transparency is key." Chase blinked, "Which is why I've brought in an independent audit team to evaluate our finances. For the past 5 years," I continued. "They began reviewing our vendor contracts this morning." Gasps turned to silence. "I also believe it's time we address the real concern here, not my leadership, but how nearly $4.2 million disappeared across shell corporations linked to overseas suppliers. The same corporations registered under names connected to your college roommate and former campaign finance advisor." Chase paled. "That's slander." "I have the documents," I said. "Signed contracts, email chains, transfer logs." He stood. "This is a setup." "No, Chase," I said, voice unwavering. "This is accountability." A beat. Then, another. "I moved to suspend Mr. Chase Hart from all financial oversight effective immediately, pending a full investigation," I said, turning to the board. Silence. Then hands slowly raised. One by one. The motion passed. Chase stared at me, his mouth parted in disbelief. It was the first time I had ever seen him truly shaken. He picked up his folder and stormed out, muttering something under his breath that I didn't care to catch. I exhaled deeply, but the meeting wasn't over. "I know this isn't the story anyone expected," I said to the board, to the watching shareholders. "A daughter reclaiming her voice in the ruins of a dynasty. But this company isn't a soap opera. It's a community, and I intend to lead it like one." I paused, letting the silence settle. There will be no more cover-ups, no more silencing. Every voice matters here, not just the loudest one. When I returned to my office, there was a message on my desk from HR, a list of employees who had resigned quietly over the years, every one of them tied to departments Chase controlled, every one of them worth a second chance. I would bring them back not because it made for good headlines, but because justice isn't just what you tear down, it's what you rebuild. Later that night, I stood alone in the elevator, watching the city glitter below. My phone buzzed. One text, from a number I didn't recognize. You won today, but you won't survive the week. I smiled bitterly, because this time, I wouldn't be surviving. I'd be leading, and I wasn't done yet. 2 days after the boardroom war, I found myself walking through the halls of Hart and Sloan like a ghost in my own story. Eyes followed me, some with hope, others with fear, a few with thinly veiled contempt. But I kept walking, my heels clicking against the marble, the sound crisp, deliberate, echoing louder than any whisper. The message I received after the board meeting still haunted me. You won today, but you won't survive the week. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And I knew Chase too well. He wasn't the kind of man to lose quietly. The morning passed in tense silence. My office felt colder. The phone rang less. Even Rosa was quieter than usual. Something in the air had shifted, not the kind you can name, the kind you feel in your bones. At 11:17 a.m., the first strike landed. My executive assistant rushed in, her hands shaking. Ava, you need to see this, right now. She handed me a printed article from a major business site. Bold headline, Whistleblower alleges Ava Hart misused philanthropic funds for personal gain. I felt the color drain from my face. What is this? I whispered, already knowing the answer. She pointed to the bottom. It's spreading, everywhere. I opened my laptop, and there it was. 4 more outlets picking it up. A storm of hashtags, exploding on social media. Thousands of strangers debating my integrity as if they knew me. Pictures of me from volunteer projects twisted into clickbait captions. Comments calling me a fraud, a thief, a hypocrite in designer shoes. There were fabricated quotes, claims that I'd rerouted donations to my personal account, photoshopped screenshots, even a fake voicemail, allegedly of me threatening a supplier. The detail was staggering. He hadn't just tried to ruin me. He'd prepared this attack in advance, like a chess game where I never even saw the board. I sat in my chair, still, hollow. But I didn't break. Instead, I asked my assistant to call. Our legal team, PR, and compliance. Then I called someone else, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Noah. He answered on the 3rd ring. Ava? I need help, I said. I think I'm about to lose everything. Noah Kingston wasn't just any lawyer. He was an old friend. A brilliant legal strategist turned whistleblower advocate. We had drifted apart after college, when I chose family obligation and he chose truth. He didn't ask questions, just said, I'm on my way. An hour later, he walked into my office looking exactly the same sharp eyes, same quiet intensity. He didn't smile. He simply shut the door and said, Tell me everything. I told him. About the threats, the article, the fake documents, the whispers of sabotage, the silence from some of the board members since the scandal broke. He listened, without interrupting, only scribbling notes. Then he looked up. Do you still have the original financial records from your nonprofit work? Yes, I said. All of it. Receipts, audit reports, signed acknowledgments. Good, he said. Because this isn't about a mistake, Ava. This is a takedown. Noah left to begin crafting a defense. That night, I stayed at the office until long after midnight. Alone. My body aching from exhaustion, my mind clawing through every shadow of doubt. At one point, I caught myself staring at my grandmother's compass, still sitting on the shelf. I picked it up, opened it, and whispered, I don't know how to lead through this, Grandma. I don't know if I'm enough. Then I heard the softest voice in my mind, a memory. Her voice, once full of warmth. You don't have to be sure, you just have to stand. The next morning I stood. I called a press conference. The media smelled blood. They filled the hall like sharks circling wreckage. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned in. I stepped to the podium, eyes burning but clear. "I won't pretend these accusations didn't hurt," I began. "But what hurts more is knowing how easily the truth can be drowned by noise." I held up the reports. Every cent of every donation is accounted for, every project documented, every survivor supported. This isn't just my defense, it's their story too. Then I did something Chase never expected. I named him. I laid out the timeline, the motive, the proof of his shell companies, the rigged headlines, the internal sabotage. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just told the truth, and I ended with this. This company was never supposed to be about who could shout the loudest or crush the hardest. It was built to create, to serve, and I still believe in that. Reporters shouted questions, some skeptical, some stunned. But the tide had turned. That evening, as I walked to my car, I saw a small crowd gathered by the entrance. Employees, some from departments I'd never visited, others from floors I hadn't reached yet. They clapped. Not loud. Not for show, just steady, quiet, real. Rosa was among them, tears in her eyes. "You held the line," she whispered when I passed. I nodded, the lump in my throat too heavy to speak. In the distance, I saw Chase watching from a black sedan parked across the street. His expression unreadable. But his fists were clenched again, and I knew this war wasn't over. But I also knew something else. He was running out of moves, and I was just getting started. The air outside was bitterly cold when I returned home that night. The snow had started falling again, soft, silent, deceiving in its serenity. Inside, the house was dark except for the lamp on the hallway table and the golden flicker of the fireplace in the living room. I dropped my coat on the chair and sat down, exhausted but too restless to sleep. I stared into the flames, and for the first time in weeks, let the silence speak. I thought of Chase, of how far he'd gone, of the lies, the forged evidence, the carefully timed scandal. But more than that, I thought about the look in his eyes the day I named him publicly. He hadn't looked angry, not even betrayed. He'd looked startled, as if he never believed I'd have the courage to fight back. He was right to be surprised. I hadn't fought back before. Not when my father silenced me at the table. Not when Chase got his first promotion simply for bearing the family name. Not when I was told to focus on the charity work because the boardroom wasn't built for sentiment. But this time was different. Because now I had something none of them did. Not control, not money, not even power. I had proof. The next morning, I walked into Hart and Sloan with a plan. Not to survive, but to win. While my team filed official countersuits against the media outlets spreading the false allegations, Noah and I worked on something else entirely. We combed through every financial transaction Chase had touched in the last 3 years, every board vote, every expense account, and then we found it, a single payment, buried deep in an offshore routing statement. It was small, just under $12,000, but it was enough. It was a payout to a former contractor, one, who'd been fired 6 months ago for leaking internal emails. Only, he hadn't leaked anything. He'd been framed by Chase. The payment had been disguised as severance, but it was hush money, and it wasn't the only one. Once we uncovered the first, the rest began to unravel. 3 more shell accounts, multiple kickbacks from vendors who'd suddenly gotten exclusive contracts, and then the real smoking gun, a wire transfer from one of the dummy corporations to a private investigator. The same investigator who'd been responsible for obtaining the falsified audio clip of me. It was all there. I remember looking at Noah after the final piece clicked into place. "He weaponized the company," I said. "He turned your grandmother's legacy into a laundering machine," Noah replied, and I felt it again, that spark. That storm inside me that had grown from a flicker into a wildfire. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everything they had turned into a lie. The next board meeting was called by emergency vote. Every director was present, even the ones who had stayed silent, especially the ones who had doubted me. I walked in with a black binder, plain, unmarked, but inside it, everything that mattered. The moment I stood at the head of the table, the room went still. "I'm not here to ask for your trust," I said. "I'm here to show you the truth." I opened the binder, the first page, a wire transfer log from Chase's private account to the shell company. The second, a testimonial from the fired contractor, now protected under whistleblower status. The third, a timeline, cross-referencing, media releases with internal server access logs, all pointing to Chase's executive assistant's workstation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pace or shout or point fingers. I just stood there, steady, clear, present. Everything you've read in the past week was manufactured, strategically planted, and paid for, using company funds. There were gasps. One board member actually stood and walked to the window, hands trembling behind his back. Then I dropped the final page. It was a signed confession. Not from Chase, from the private investigator. He had flipped the night before. Said he couldn't sleep. Said he had a daughter. Said he saw the press conference and realized the woman on that stage wasn't the villain he was paid to destroy. He'd agreed to testify in full. That was the moment the room turned, not with applause. Not even with words, just silence. A silence so heavy it pressed down on the wood-paneled walls and into every vein of that company. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Chase Hart was stripped of all executive authority. His shares were frozen pending investigation, and by unanimous decision, I was confirmed as CEO. The room emptied slowly after that. No congratulations, no backslaps, just quiet respect. But just before I left, the oldest member of the board, a man named Thomas Crane, who'd served under my grandfather, touched my arm. "Your grandmother would have been proud," he said, softly. "Not because you fought back, but because you didn't become them." I nodded, my throat thick. That night, I walked the halls alone, past portraits of men who built empires on bravado, past rooms where decisions were once made behind closed doors, where power lived in shadows, and I made a vow that under my leadership, this company would never again be a fortress for the arrogant. It would be a sanctuary for the worthy. Because the truth was, I didn't rise from the ashes of their betrayal. I built something from them. And in the end, I didn't just reclaim what was mine. I rewrote the legacy, and this time, no one could take it away. 3 days after Chase Hart was formally removed from the board, I received a text from an unknown number. "You may have won the board, but I know your weak spot." TikTok. It was unsigned. But I didn't need a signature. I knew the voice behind those words. It was Chase. And he was spiraling. His power had been stripped, his plans exposed, and his name dragged through the very mud he once so proudly threw at others. But that message told me something terrifying. He wasn't finished. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I walked the length of the house like a ghost, the walls echoing with every step. My mind raced. Not with fear, but with fury. I wasn't afraid of what he'd tried to do. I was angry that he still thought he had any say in how this story ended. Didn't respond to the message. Instead, I forwarded it to Noah, who was already 3 steps ahead. He'd hired digital security consultants the moment the board confirmed my position. "We're not just securing your inbox," he'd said. "We're securing your future." By the end of the week, we had Chase's burner phone traced to a hotel downtown, one of the last places still willing to take his money. I didn't send anyone. I didn't need to. The press had already started circling like sharks. They'd gotten wind of the fake emails, the bribes, the whistleblowers. Rumors swirled that Chase had paid influencers to smear me online, using bots and burner accounts to ignite false scandals. But what hit hardest wasn't any of that. It was when a video clip surfaced, not of Chase, of me. It was from years ago, long before any of this had started. I was standing outside a shelter, speaking to a group of volunteers. In the background, a woman cried. She had lost her child to the foster system, her house to foreclosure, her voice to trauma. And I was hugging her, just holding her while she broke. The clip had no audio, just the image of me and this broken stranger, and it was captioned, "She cares more about strangers than her own family." The video went viral. The comments were divided. Half accused me of being performative. The other half defended me, but none of that mattered, because Chase had crossed a new line. He wasn't just attacking my leadership, he was attacking my compassion, my core. I sat in my office that night, watching the clip on loop. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just watched. Because I knew what Chase had never understood. You don't beat a person like me by reminding me of who I am. You make me stronger. The next morning, I called an emergency company-wide meeting. Not with the board, with the employees, the janitors, the accountants, the interns, the ones who were never invited into the mahogany-paneled rooms, the ones who had watched every scandal unfold and wondered if they'd still have jobs in a month. I stood on the same stage my father once used to hand out fake awards to yes men. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need one. My name is Evelyn Hart, I said. And if you've been wondering who to trust, let me make it easy for you. Trust yourselves. There was silence. Then I continued. I've seen the footage. I've read the comments. I've seen what happens when kindness is used as a weapon. I paused. But I am not ashamed of that woman, that moment, that hug, because I didn't run this company to be seen. I run it to serve. A ripple moved through the crowd. I was called weak for choosing people over profits. I was called emotional for believing work should never come at the cost of dignity. I was called naive for thinking we could rebuild this place with honesty. But you know what? I let the words settle before delivering the strike. They were wrong. And they're still wrong. Applause broke. Hesitant at first, then rising. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because when you fight for the right reasons, the tears fall when the battle's over. Later that day, a former employee named Rachel, one of the dozens Chase had dismissed without severance, walked back into the building. She was holding her child's hand. "I saw your speech," she said, her voice shaking. "And I thought, maybe I could come home." I took her hand. "You never stopped being part of this family." And that was it. That was the moment I realized we weren't just surviving Chase's destruction. We were healing. Brick by brick, truth by truth. But healing, like war, has casualties. And sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones we don't see. That night, I got a call. It wasn't about business. It wasn't about Chase. It was from my mother. She'd been silent this whole time, absent, quiet, like a ghost from another life. But now her voice cracked through the phone. "He's checked himself into rehab," she said. "Chase, he said he couldn't breathe anymore, said he hated what he'd become." I didn't respond right away, not out of anger, out of mourning, not for the man he was, but for the boy he used to be. The brother who once built pillow forts with me under the dining room table. The boy who cried when our dog died. The boy who wanted so badly to be seen that he became everything he once feared. "I'm sorry," my mother whispered, and I said the only thing I could, "So am I." The next day, I walked back into the building. My head held high, my truth intact, because I wasn't just leading a company, I was leading a legacy. and no amount of betrayal would ever take that from me. It was a Tuesday morning when I finally stepped into my father's old office, not as a visitor, not as an intruder, but as its rightful heir. The air was heavy with the scent of cedarwood and legacy. For years, this space had been a fortress built to remind everyone of who was in control. Leather-bound books, gleaming plaques, portraits hung like trophies on the walls, symbols of a reign that had ruled more through fear than respect. I didn't come to admire it. I came to change it. The sun poured in through the wide windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. I stood there, motionless, remembering the girl I used to be, the one who once sat outside that very door waiting for permission to speak, the one who had been overlooked, dismissed, humiliated, even by her own blood. And I thought about how many times I almost gave up. How many nights I cried alone, not because I was weak, but because I kept going despite it all. I thought about Chase. I hadn't heard from him since he checked into rehab, and maybe I never would. His damage ran deeper than just ambition. It came from years of believing love had to be earned through conquest. But I had finally broken that cycle, not by beating him at his own game, but by refusing to play it. I didn't win through vengeance. I won by staying rooted in something stronger, dignity. As I sat down at the desk, I opened the drawer. Inside, where my father once kept pens and power plays, was a single item, the compass my grandmother gave me. Its gold plating had dulled, but its message hadn't. I remembered her words clearly now. No matter where this life takes you, lead with your heart and your spine aligned. Power is loud, purpose is silent, but stronger. That day, we announced a new company policy, one that restructured not just the leadership, but the culture. We replaced outdated hierarchies with collaborative councils. We opened mentorship, programs for employees returning from parental leave. We launched scholarships for first-generation college students in our employee families. And we didn't stop there. We built transparency walls, literal glass spaces where any team member could see the decisions being made on their behalf. No more secrets, no more shadows. People didn't just begin to trust again, they began to believe. One night, about a month later, I was walking through the building after hours. The lights were dim, the hum of machines had quieted, and I saw something I'll never forget. Rosa, the janitor who had once brought me a cup of tea when I was crumbling in that corner office, was sitting with a young employee from accounting. They were laughing over lunchboxes, comparing stories about their childhoods. No tension, no hierarchy, just connection. And I knew then, we weren't just healing a company, we were healing people. But here's the truth, it didn't come easily. Healing never does. It cost me my comfort. It cost me my pride. It almost cost me my faith in people. But it gave me something far more valuable. It gave me clarity. If you've made it this far in the story, you've witnessed a journey of reclamation. Reclaiming not just a legacy, but a voice. Reclaiming not just a seat at the table, but the right to rewrite the rules. So let's reflect for a moment. What was this story really about? It wasn't about inheritance, or revenge, or a sibling rivalry gone corporate. It was about what happens when a woman stands in her truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it hurts, even when the whole world calls her foolish for trying. It was about choosing empathy in a system built on power. It was about protecting what matters, even when that protection doesn't serve your ego, but your values. And most of all, it was about becoming the kind of leader, the kind of human, who makes it safe for others to be strong too. So what can you take from this? Here's the lesson. You will be underestimated. You will be talked down to. You will be told your softness is a weakness. You will be told your principles are impractical. But I'm here to remind you, softness is not fragility. Principles are not obstacles. And you don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. If you're walking through your own fire, whether it's at work, at home, or inside your own mind, remember this. You don't need permission to lead with integrity. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need to wait for someone else to tell you you're worthy. You already are. So take the reins of your story. Take the chair at that table. Walk through that door not because you were invited, but because you built the door yourself. And if this story lit something in you, if it reminded you of your strength, your worth, or your quiet power, then don't let it stop here. Subscribe to this channel, not for my sake, but for yours, because this is just one story, and there are so many more waiting to be told. Stories of resilience, of redemption, of rebuilding. And if we're going to keep telling them, we need your voice here with us. So subscribe, stand with us. And remember, the strongest legacies are not written in ink or etched in marble. They're built in the silent moments. When no one's watching and you choose to do the right thing anyway, that's how you change the world. One truth at a time.